The Wooden Sword. Once upon a time, there was a king who was always stressed. Oh, it was terrible. It was so heavy to be a king. He had all these debts, and he had all these things to worry about, and there were public relations, and there were the management of the country, and there was the economy, and then, oh, it was so stressful. And he could never get a good night's rest, and he was always tired, and he had so many concerns, and he was always worried, and he envied the poor people. Oh, it must be so nice to be poor, to not have to worry about all these things. He would watch them go about their business from the window, and they seemed to be singing as they would walk along with their tools. All they had to do was go about and work and sing and go back home, and that was all. They didn't have to worry. Oh, if only he could be poor, just for a day. And one day he thought, I'm the king. I can do whatever I want. And so he decided that he was going to be poor for a day. Well, he told everybody in the palace that he must not be disturbed because he was conducting important affairs of state. And he put this big sign on his door saying, "Do not disturb." And he snuck out, stole some of the cook's clothes. Well, no, they were too nice. He stole something and put it on. Made sure to put some ashes on his face and his hair get all messed up, and then took his shoes off and looked at himself in some polished bronze mirrors. He looked just like a beggar. This was perfect. Ha! He didn't have to worry about anything now, and he wandered out of the palace, and nobody recognized him at all. Well, the king was delighted. He didn't have to worry about affairs of state, about the economy, about wars, about anything like that. But pretty soon he realized that poor people had concerns of their own. Like, for example, where to get food. And obviously, since he had gone out dressed as a beggar, he hadn't taken any money with him, and he didn't know what food cost anyway. He'd always been served food. He'd never had to worry about food at all. Not only that, but it started getting late. And he realized that he'd never been hungry in his life before, and he realized that was a pretty big worry. But it started getting late, and he realized, if I didn't have the palace to go back to, I would need to worry about somewhere to sleep. And he started wondering, well, who had the worst worries? And this was really stressful, and he was walking past when suddenly he smelled bread baking. Ooh. He was hungry. Well, he saw through the window a poor man sitting at a table. It was a very small house. Sitting at a table, just about to eat a fresh loaf of bread. And the king thought, well, I'm a beggar, might as well. So he knocked on the door, and the poor man opened it with this great big smile. Excuse me, said the king. I was wondering, might I have a little bit of something to eat? The poor man said, of course, come on in. Come, sit down. I was just about to have dinner, and this bread is fresh. The king sat down, and he looked around. He could tell that the man was very poor, and he didn't understand why the man was so cheerful and smiling. He quickly took a piece of the bread that the man offered him and ate it, and the man said, but first, we must give thanks. And he prayed to his God and was very grateful, and the king stared at him. He couldn't understand why the man seemed to be so at peace and was smiling and was cheerful and was eating that bread as if it was the tastiest bread that he'd ever had. And yes, it was fresh and it was okay, but the king had had much better bread many times before. In fact, the bread wasn't even that good. And finally the king asked, well, my friend, why do you seem so happy tonight? Oh, said the man. Well, it's been a good day. You see, I fix shoes, old shoes, you know. People bring me their old shoes, and I sew them up, and I glue them back together, and sometimes the business is good, sometimes it's bad, but today it was good. I fixed some good shoes today, and I was able to buy fresh bread instead of old bread, and it's a good day. Well, said the king, but what if tomorrow you don't manage to make enough to buy your dinner? Then what? Ah, said the old man, I'll find a way or make one. The road will provide. I have faith, and all will be well. The old man said this very intensely because he was seeing how the king's face was lined with worry lines and how he looked tired and there were bags under his eyes, and he could see that the king, of course he didn't know it was the king, was very carrying a heavy burden. All will be well, he said again. All will be well. And the king heard this, and it bothered him. It bothered him because he knew better than that. He knew that no, not all will be well, and not everything works out. And he was angry that this man seemed to be so content with life. And he thought, this man doesn't really know what it's like to have a hard life or what it's like to have things to worry about. If tomorrow he's not able to work, then I'll see that he's just as stressed and anxious as I am. The king was one of those people that it was hard for him to see somebody better off than himself. And so that night, after saying goodbye to his new friend, the king went back to the palace, and as he tossed and turned in his comfortable bed that night, it bothered him even more. And in the morning, he knew he was going to test the poor man. If he can't work today, I'll go visit him tonight. He's going to be hungry. And then we'll see that he's not saying that all will be well. He'll be just like I am. He'll know what it's like to worry. And so the king pronounced an order. And when the poor man got up in the morning and went out to work, suddenly he saw that there were soldiers, and all over the town there were big signs saying, "From now on, it is illegal to fix old shoes. If your shoes wear out, you must buy new ones." Well, the poor man was horrified. How was he going to work? His livelihood, his profession, gone from one day to the next. Well, he said to himself, I'll find a way or make one. The road will provide, and all will be well. And so he started walking around the town, looking to see if there was anything he could do, and he noticed that there was an old woman struggling to carry some heavy buckets of water from the well, and he rushed up to her and says, "Excuse me, madam, let me help you with that." Well, he carried her buckets, took them all the way to her house, and started going on his way. But she said, "Wait, young man, wait, here, thank you very much. Let me give you some money for that." Oh, he thought, well, I wasn't expecting anything, but thank you very much. I certainly could use it. And he decided, this will be my business now. And he went back to the well and said, "Excuse me, madam, I am a professional water carrier. Let me take this to your house. I will get you there in half the time and twice the water." And he started carrying everybody's water, and people would give him a little bit of change, whatever they had, just tips, but by the end of the day, he had even more money than he made fixing old shoes. Well, 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 he thought, the road has provided, and all was well. And that night, he had fresh bread and cheese and even a little bit of fruit. And when the king went that night, dressed in rags again, as a beggar, knocked on the door, the poor man threw open the door and said, "My friend, welcome, join me. I'm so glad you came back. I have the most wonderful food, and food always tastes better when you have someone to share it with." The king stared. "Where did you get all this?" he said. "I heard that the king proclaimed that it was illegal to fix old shoes." "Oh, yes," said the man, "but I told you all would be well, and the road provided. Instead, when I saw that I couldn't fix old shoes, I started carrying water, and I did even better for myself." "Really?" said the king. "Huh." And he ate grumpily, thinking, this man's faith is... He doesn't know what it's like to suffer. I want to see, when he really goes hungry, what he'll figure out then. And so that night he tossed and turned, and it bothered him all the more. And in the morning, he passed a proclamation. From now on, it is illegal to carry water for others, or to help them for tips in any way. Well, when the poor man got up and went back to the well to do the same thing, and he found the soldiers in the proclamation, he thought, well, the road provided yesterday, it will provide again. All will be well. I'll find a way or make one. And so he started walking around the town, seeing what he could do, and he saw woodcutters carrying big, heavy bundles of wood. "Excuse me," he said, how can I learn how to do what you do?" "It's easy. We always need more wood. Not a lot of people are strong enough. You look strong. Come join me. I could use an assistant." "Of course," said the man. And he followed the woodcutters into the forest and chopped trees all day and carried it back to the town, and he carried more than anybody else. And that night, after selling the wood, he made enough money to buy bread, cheese, fruit, butter, soup, and even some wine. Well, when the king knocked on the door, the poor man threw it open and said, "Welcome, my friend. Look at all this spread. I'm so glad you have come to share it with me." And the king said, "What? But how? I heard the proclamation. The king said it was illegal to carry water. How did you?" "Oh, yes, I know, but instead I ended up chopping wood. I'm a woodcutter now. And look at all this. The road provided. All will be well. I find a way, or I make one." "It's not that easy," thought the king. "It's never that easy. Why doesn't he understand? I've got to find something to really, truly test him." So the king went back, and that night, tossing and turning, in the morning, he knew. Ha! I know. He put out a proclamation. All woodcutters must report to the palace. Now, when the man got up and went out to collect more wood, he saw all his friends from the day before walking towards the palace, and he followed them. And once they arrived, the king himself came out to the balcony and said, "Woodcutters, you are now in my service. I am hiring all of you to be guards of the palace." Well, the woodcutters looked at each other happily, because being a guard of the palace paid really well, a lot more than being a woodcutter. And so they were given a uniform, and they started marching around, and the poor man was delighted. He guarded that palace. He looked around. He made sure that not even a mouse could get inside. And that night, he went to the captain to ask for his wages. But the captain said, "Nope. Guards of the palace get paid once a month." "Once a month?" Well, the poor man went back home. "I can't go for a whole month without making any money at all. But now this is my job, and I don't have time to get any other job or to do anything. And what am I going to do? Well, I'll find a way or make one." And so he pulled out his sword and thought, we're at peace. We don't have any enemies. I don't really need this sword. And so he carefully took off the blade of the sword and sold the metal. Now, it was an expensive, fine sword, and he was given a lot of money, enough money to cover the whole month. And he knew that at the end of the month, once he got his wages as a guard, he would be able to buy the sword back. But in the meantime, so that nobody would notice, he carefully carved a wooden blade and attached it to the handle, put it back in the sheath. As long as he didn't have to pull the sword out, nobody would ever know. And that night, when the king, dressed as a beggar, came to the house, the poor man pulled open the door and said, "Welcome!" And now on the table there was fruit and soup and meats, all sorts of meats, and bread and butter and cheese and wine. And the king said, "What? But I knew you must have become a guard, and they only get paid once a month. How?" "Well," said the man. "Look at my sword. Ha 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 ha. Nobody will ever find out. I told you. You find a way or you make one. That's all there is. And the road provides." The king was furious. He was so mad that this man was able to solve everything, and he never got worried or stressed. And the king was thinking, I've never been in a position like this before. I know. I'm gonna trap him this time. And the next day, as the poor man was walking back and forth in front of the palace with his sword, looking all mean and menacing, suddenly the king himself came out, and he was dragging a man by the hair. "There," he said, throwing him to the ground in front of the poor man. This man was in my kitchen trying to steal some of my food. He's a thief, and he must be executed. You, guard, you look like a strong man. That's what I hired you for. Cut off his head right now." And by now a crowd had gathered around, and the poor man thought, uh-oh, if I pull out my sword, everyone's going to see it's made out of wood, and then I'm going to get in trouble. And besides, I don't want to kill a man for stealing food. And the man was crying and saying, "Please, please, I used to be a water carrier, and I was trying so hard, but then you made it illegal, and I couldn't get any job at all, and I just needed some food for my family. Please, please." Well, poor man thought quickly, and then he looked up into the heavens. "Your Majesty," he said, "of course, I shall obey your orders. But first, this man has not had yet a fair trial. We do not know what his story is, and therefore I call upon God himself, God who knows all. May God see what is happening now. If this man does not deserve to be executed, make my sword turn into wood." And as he pulled out his sword, everyone gasped and started clapping. "It's a miracle! It's a miracle! It's a miracle!" And the king, "All right. Do you recognize me?" "You're the king, of course, your Majesty. And of course, I mean no disobedience to you." Yeah. I know. I'm the beggar that you've been sharing food with every night. And I kept trying to test you. Now what I really want is for you to teach me. I've tried to think that everything will be all right. Will you teach me how to believe as you do? The man smiled, said, "Well, I'll find a way or make one." And the poor man became the king's most trusted advisor. And little by little, the king began to smile and to sleep peacefully.